A lot of young guys will say that they're not going to do something because it goes against their principles. Oh yeah, these guys, these young guys especially, they're so full of it. Okay, they say, oh, this goes against my principles. I'm not going to do it, or I don't accept it. And little squawking little chickadees, for crying out loud. What the hell's the matter with them? What's wrong with them is that a lot of times they're confusing their preferences with their principles. A lot of times they would prefer something, one thing, whatever it is. But they think that this preference that they have is a principle that must be defended. This is a mark of immaturity, it's childish. You have to understand the difference between a principle and a preference. Because a lot of times, a principle can masquerade as a preference, and a preference masquerade as a principle. You have to distinguish between the two. You have to distinguish between that which is you are inflexible about and you will never compromise over, and that which is really like you prefer it, but it doesn't really matter. Let me give you an example. Suppose you're a vegan. I don't know why you'd be a vegan, but whatever, run with it. Suppose you're a vegan, right? And a vegan is no animal products whatsoever, except cheese. Cheese is, of course, an animal product. It comes from milk, that comes from cows, right? Okay, so are you a vegan? Is your veganism that steady of a principle? No, it's really a preference, see? You don't eat meat probably because you don't really like it, and you're masquerading your principle, your preference rather, as a principle. Because you're saying, I'm a vegan, no animal product except cheese, you know? And so what are you really saying? You're saying, oh, well, you know, I don't like, you know, animal flesh. I don't like the taste of pork or beef or fish or whatever, but I do like animal product because I like, you know, cheese. So it's not a principle, it's just a preference, you see? And that's the reason I personally despise so many vegans, because I recognize that it's not a principle thing, it's a preference thing. They just prefer one thing over the other. They have confused their consumerist preference for some kind of grand moral principle. And in point of fact, some of them dress up their consumerist preference in this grand moral principle. I mean, I don't have a problem with vegans, because I personally like vegan food. I've gone to vegan restaurants all the time. I mean, since forever. I like it. I enjoy it. It's light, you know, it's great for lunch. You can have a vegan meal during lunch and you're not going to feel drowsy in the afternoon. I personally love vegan food, but, you know, it's just a preference for me. It's not a grand moral principle. But a lot of self-conscious vegans, well, you see what I'm saying? Yeah, and this goes for other stuff too. You know, there's always the guy who says, you know, I can't stand liars. I hate liars, and they lie all the time. And they lie all the time about big things and little things, right? And they keep on going, and I hate liars. Liars are awful, right? But then they come across a liar, a known liar, a liar that's just clear as day he's a liar. Like, for instance, Bill Clinton. There are so many people, I remember in the 90s when he was president, and saying, oh, I hate liars, I hate this. They were talking crap about Newt Gingrich because he was like a, you know, he's a sneaky guy, right? But, you know, then it came out that Bill Clinton was lying his pants off, literally, with Monica Lewinsky, right? And they gave the guy a pass. And so this big principle that they hate liars and they won't tolerate lying, it's not a principle, it's just a preference. You see? It happens all the time. It happens more that way than the other way. That is, of people confusing a preference with a principle. Offhand, I can't think of any time that actually happens, but the times that people confuse a preference with a principle, you'll realize that all the time, and you'll look at those people as hypocrites, right? And don't give me the stuff that you don't cotton and don't truck with hypocrites, because we all do. We are all hypocritical at different points in our lives, and sometimes at the same moment we're complete hypocrites, right? Number one. And number two, everybody is hypocritical and lies for various reasons, and so you just have to forgive people, yeah? But I think that's the point that I'm trying to make here, is that, see, you have to understand that a lot of times people want to be better than who they actually are. They just can't cut it. They can't, you know, live up to their principle. They want to be a vegan, but they love cheese, right? That happens all the time, and you have to forgive people. You can't hold them to a standard. You know, this isn't some sort of inquisition. This is just life, you know? And it's messy and sloppy, and we all want to be better than who we actually are. And a lot of times we just can't live up to that. We say that we're in favor of this thing, this great principle. We're going to reach this great principle. Yeah. And then, they settle. They settle and they don't reach for the great principle. And, that's how people are. And you who are young, don't begrudge people for it. Be understanding. Because a lot of times people really want to achieve greatness. People really want to live up to their principles, but they can't. It's just beyond them. It's too heavy a burden. Yeah, and also, don't get caught in the trap of confusing one of your preferences for a principle and thereby, because you think it's a principle, having to do something that will go against your best interest. Let me explain. So you're a vegan, like in the previous example, right? But you love cheese, which means that you don't have the principle, right? Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that you are a strict vegan, right? You're a strict vegan, and it turns out that you have to actually consume animal protein, or else you're going to become severely malnourished, right? Okay, so what do you do there? Do you die and live by your principles of veganism? No, of course not. That would be stupid, okay? The animals are getting slaughtered anyway, okay? Your consumption of, a steak is not going to change the fact that they're slaughtering cows every day, every minute of the day, okay? It's not going to change anything. So who are you hurting? Living up to this principle of yours. Oh, I'm not going to eat meat, yeah? Who is benefiting here? More to the point, who is being harmed? Huh? Are you changing anything? Yes, of course, if everybody becomes a vegan, then the meat industry grinds to a halt, right? But in this hypothetical that I've set up, I'm basically saying that if you do not eat meat, you will die of malnutrition, lack of vitamins, protein, whatever it is, okay? And yeah, you can say that veganism, you can eat tofu and it's the same as beef. But let's say, for the sake of this hypothetical, that it's not the case, that you have to eat meat. If you don't eat meat, you're going to die tomorrow. Do you live by these principles of yours of veganism and die tomorrow? It's a hypothetical, so I can do whatever I want here, right? Tomorrow you will die if you don't eat a steak. You not eating a steak is not going to change anything. You living by your principles is going to ensure your death tomorrow. What do you do? Seriously, and this is a serious question. Because these principles, what you think are principles, they're just preferences, or they are self-destructive principles. And what you're really looking for is not a principled life. No. What you're really looking for is to feel that you are morally superior. And that's pride. Yeah, because ultimately that's what I'm talking about here. Okay? That's a real point of this video. So many people who run around saying that they have their principles and whatnot, what they're really trying to do is show off their superior morality. They are filled with pride, thinking that they are vegans, that they are anti-war or anti-this or pro-that or whatever. Okay? There are very, very few people who truly live up to their principles and truly hold them. Very, very few people. And the fact of the matter is, most of those people come to very, very difficult ends, okay? If it's for some principle, some goal to be achieved. If they live by a principle of never causing harm, trying not to lie or to lie as little as possible, or to lie in the things that are least important so as not to hurt other people's feelings and whatnot. Okay, those are principles that you can live by, right? But the grand principle, like, oh, I'm not going to eat meat because, I want to save the cows. Oh, man, that's moral grandstanding. It's basically pride, okay? And a lot of times, especially in our contemporary culture, that has glorified consumerism. It's glorified consumerism, and rather than allowing people to just consume, we feel the need to dress up our consumerist preferences in some sort of principle. And because we are masquerading as people with principles, because we are walking around saying that, oh, don't eat meat because, it's bad for the cows, they wind up becoming so malnourished that they die. And they hold on to these stupid principles that are really just preferences. You see what I'm saying? You see the tragedy of people trying to appear to be better than who they are, for the sake of some audience. Who's around? Who's looking? What are you talking about? So you see the tragedy of confusing principles with preferences. You got to pay attention. You got to pay attention to yourself, because a lot of times you like something or you dislike something. And because of this preference, that is irrational. That's just because, you don't like the taste of beef, and so you just don't like it. What is somebody going to put a gun to your head and force you to eat meat? No, you don't like it. And just because of this preference, you decide, I'll be a vegan. And then I'll turn this into some sort of moral crusade. And then I'll do things that are destructive to myself perhaps, or destructive to others. Maybe I'll set some slaughterhouse on fire, save the cows. People do that. People do all kinds of crazy stuff because they are confusing preferences with principles. If you have a principle, whatsoever it is, you have to examine it with a fine-tooth comb. You have to put it under a microscope. If it's a valid principle, it'll stand up to any scrutiny. The truth is like that. If something is true, you can examine it 6 ways to Sunday, 7 ways to Sunday, or however the expression goes. You can examine it with a microscope, an electron microscope. You can go over it day and night for weeks on end, and the truth isn't going to change because it's the truth. If you have a principle, it should be able to stand scrutiny. It should be able to stand scrutiny of anything, any hypothetical, any thought experiment. And you should put your different principles, whatsoever you believe those principles to be, under the intellectual microscope that you carry around in your head, and see if it's a real principle or if it's just dressed up in the garments of principles so as to hide the fact that it's just something that you prefer. I think a lot of kids, young guys, would save themselves a lot of problems if they did this little experiment. I know I would have.